Welcome to the Agile Wire, where professional Scrum trainers Jeff Boobles and Jeff Molesky discuss Agile topics. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Boobles and Jeff Molesky.
And we are recording. All right, Mr. Boobles, kick us off, man.
All right, so this week on the podcast, we got Veronica Steward. Veronica, maybe you could just give our listeners a little background about yourself and what you've been doing in the Agile community.
All right. Well, I always like to share where I originally started from, which was I was a high school science biology teacher. And it has a direct correlation to how I think and everything that I do today, and probably why I got into Agile itself. So the first time I came across Agile was probably back in 2005. When I got out of teaching, I pretty much moved over into being as a software trainer. I was able to branch over to that, which eventually led me into roles in project management and then also in product, because I became so in tune with the products that I was helping install that it led me into product development. Once I got into Agile, I really didn't look back. And I just kept on growing and evolving. Living here in Florida, Agile, it took quite a few years for it to take hold. And so I traveled a lot to try to build my career and so forth. So eventually landed me into being more in the Agile coaching side. I started out as a product owner's first role, Scrum Master, so yada, yada, yada. Been helping with transformations in various roles over the last 14 years, either being as an employee or consultant, which I've been in 10 years. I've been on an independent consultant for about 7.5 years. And then now I'm actually back in as an employee. I've been watching the trends in corporations where they're bringing the human element. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to give it a try and go back in, take a break from the hustle of contracts and looking for work and truth. And I'm really enjoying rolling my hands up and being part of it versus the external coming in and helping with it. And I'm finding it quite challenging in truth, but it's probably good for me and my growth. And that's where I am today. I am in an Agile Practices group, and we are in the beginning stages of agility and really trying to find the early adopters and buy-in in truth. You know, it's really just pockets. And so it's really ground zero, as most of us know it out there today.
Awesome. So, I mean, this leads probably right into like you've just, left consulting, got into a more employment relationship. And we were talking about before we started recording the survival mode that a lot of organizations are kind of getting into. And is that one of the reasons that maybe I guess I can ask this question first and we can define what the survival mode is, but like, is that one of the reasons like you jumped out of consulting and kind of into more of an employment relationship is because you see that trend?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of times I self-reflect survival versus thriving, even on a personal level. And I started realizing if I'm starting to feel and think that way, right? Kind of, I'm getting to that age where I'm thinking about retirement more, I'm not going to lie, and trying to slow it down, right? And what does that mean now in a perspective of companies when they are still thinking about surviving? Can I take that personal perspective and bringing it into companies? So for me, yeah, it's a fresh take to say, okay, how can I appreciate the need to survive as a business and the need to survive at every employee? But there's a sense of me, and I didn't mention that I went through life coaching, and we talked about it offline versus recording, is the thriving aspect of it, right? I really truly believe that I want people to feel like it's Friday night every day when they come to work. And so I wanted to bring life coaching into organizations, some of that thinking, which actually makes you feel like you are thriving, whatever that means to you. So how do you make a company culture thrive, right? Instead of being highly reactive and surviving in today's world.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the surviving? So when you say survival mode, in my head, I think fight or flight.
Yeah.
But that's just my interpretation of it. So can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean for a business when they're in survival versus thriving mode?
Well, the short answer would be highly reactive and really addressing what I call the acute conditions of what is actually in front of them and what's causing that pressure, right? That immediate pain point and problem that they need to solve. We do that in our personal lives, right? Is just to get through today. It's highly reactive. It's not necessarily looking beyond of what the possibilities that could be and what doesn't exist in front of you. And so survival mode is always what is now and what is happening, and being very reactive to not having a pause of going, what's the possibilities of what could be, right? That's kind of how I see surviving. It's not taking a step back of the what if.
Sure. So to reframe it, and maybe in some other words, it's more of it's reacting, it's just doing the things, and it's not very strategic. Like, we're not going to think about doing something very deliberately. We got to get the thing done. We're a startup company, and we just signed a contract for this big implementation. We've never done something like this. We just got to get it done, or we're just not going to survive the quarter. Like, that's kind of the situation, right? Like, you just got to get it done. Like, that's kind of thing. We can't think about strategically how to build this. We just got to get it done. Is that kind of the same?
Yeah, and
Are we on
and
the same
I love
page
where
here?
you're going with even strategic, because think about, even with strategy, you could be highly survival versus thriving. And so I would say that it even goes all the way up from strategic and the executing aspect layers of an organization. So for example, you hear out there today about having the difference between strategic and planning. There is no such thing as strategic planning, right? I'm sure you've heard and seen a lot of things, even in the Harvard Business Review, and people that speak from there talk about there's no such thing as strategic planning, right? And the mindset around that is it is highly analytical, and it is really based on certainty and knowns and having to plan, right? And so when we think about survival mode, it's always about what you know. And it's not necessarily being comfortable with what you don't know. And so this is kind of where I start to go in, and very kind of curious where the thoughts from the two of you is you see things like, with Snowden's and his Cynefin of complexity, working in the unknown. In survival companies, how do you think they probably handle working in complexity when they want everything to be known? And so there's that big thing in organizations of being project-centric versus product-centric. You have all of these types of labels and things that are out there today. It's really making you feel that you have control and have certainty. We always want to feel safe, right? And so as we're coming through in today's economy where there's a lot of uncertainty, what's the natural human instinct is to try to create stability and certainty around the world that is uncertain. And so that survival mode, your natural instincts, right? Some humans will treat it differently than others. What say the two of you on that? I mean, is that something that probably resonates with you? Is it when you're versed with something that you don't know, do you react to it differently, right, than others, right? And some others will always go do what they know and always know, versus some people are comfortable with the unknown.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think I'm pretty comfortable with the unknown, because that happens all the time when you're in consulting. You just walk into stuff and you got to figure it out, and you just embrace a thing. And you found out in the morning, oh, I'm doing a workshop this afternoon, and I got to write it in the next hour, and you just do it, kind of thing. So, I guess so. Yeah, I think personally, I'm used to that. But I was just thinking about companies. I was kind of thinking about them as how people have Kahneman has system 1, system 2 thinking when he talks about thinking fast and slow in that book. Or we've had other people that we've worked with where they talk about lower brain thinking versus upper brain thinking, where lower brain's more that like reactive mode, like, ooh, there's a tiger bushling in the bushes, like, I need to get out of here. Like, that's a good thing to have some type of reactive mode there to help you survive, right? But so it's not just so much fight or flight is bad. It's just like there's a time and a place for it. There's also a time and a place for, hey, let's be a little bit more strategic. Let's be a little bit more adaptive. Let's try to innovate here. I think some people go to more of an iterative approach where they try to learn, and some people maybe go right to that lower brain thinking or the survival mode thinking. Which, if I'm thinking about from a company standpoint, I would think about they're going to do things that are not transformational. They're probably going to do things to reduce costs.
Yep.
They're probably going to be very cautious and risk averse in everything that they do. And then if you think about somebody who's taking the opposite of that, they're probably going to be more transformational, more profit driven, more innovative, because they realize like we have to take some risks or this won't last until long term. So it is a little bit more, you could say project product, you could say a couple other different things, but I think maybe the cost centric is what I would see in the survival mode, and maybe more profit centered. When you're taking the secondary approach there. So
I like the word that you used, risk, because that is a key thing, which has a direct correlation to fear. Now, I love Tim Ferriss, and I always talk about fear setting. And within organizations and cultures, if you really think about the dominant energies, I've talked about offline emails, the ability to measure where energy goes and how you want to contribute and make an impact. And so a lot of the executive leadership in organizations are highly pragmatic and results driven. So we know that most organizations on how you go up the hierarchy, get promoted, is based on the results that you provide, right? So highly results driven in that sense. The higher you go, there's a lot more pragmatic aspects of running business. So think of all the business schools out there, right? And the trends. So this is kind of going to what I love about where we are as a culture and society. And I follow Peter Attia, and I know that the two of you, we kind of chatted offline about that. And I started noodling on this and very kind of curious of where your thoughts are, is when it comes to the concept of medicine 2.0 and medicine 3.0. And medicine 2.0 is what is predominant out there today, which is what you are taught in medical school to treat acute conditions. It's highly based on evidence-based. And I got my little notes here just to make sure that I, did it right. And so it's really around having undergone rigorous, as they talk about it, scientific evaluation to statistically, and I can't even say the word this morning, confirm that intervention group has learned more than a control group. Now, Medicine 3.0, I'm looking forward to Peter Attia's book that's coming out in March, Medicine 3.0. I follow a lot, and he's not the only one that talks about this, but this is where it's evidence informed. So it's actually taking evidence base plus. And so this is going to take and include a lot of things that are happening in real life experiences and wisdoms and current practices. And I think some key words here, brace yourselves, those of you that are into like experimentation and more of the product stuff. It's inclusive, innovative, it's flexible. Imagine that. So this Medicine 3.0 has a direct correlation to what a lot of us in the Agile community always have been talking about in the last 20 plus years. And so you have this medicine culture moving towards what we've been talking about in agility. I think it's quite fascinating. You'll see a lot of internal medicine doctors starting to get their certifications in functional medicine, which is related to Medicine 3.0 and some of those things that I described. There's a lot to talk about where we are in corporations in the medicine world, right? And what we're trying to move towards in corporations, which is happening in the medicine world as well. So if the general population still thinks 2.0, therefore, this is why we probably have what we have a lot in corporations, especially large ones, right? Those are the ones that are really struggling out there today. Any thoughts on some of those things?
So when I, excuse me, when I think about the medicine 2 versus 3.0, sorry, clearing my throat. When I think about the medicine 2.0 versus 3.0, I think about it as generalized versus specialized, general versus precision. And what I mean by that is typically when a doctor thinks about prescribing medication, they think about what has the biggest success rate on the general population. So if I can either go with medicine X or I can go with medicine Y. Medicine X has a 60% success rate with the general population, and medicine Y has a 40% with the general population. Like, they're just playing the numbers, and there's nothing really wrong with that. If you were gambling, you would play the numbers, but it takes away the precision side of it, where it's not what's best for you, it's what's best for the general population. And so when I think about that in the realm of what you were talking about, like business side of things, to me, that's the counter, what's the word? Shoot, I can't think of the right word, but the idea of a copying organization versus a learning organization, where we just read the Amazon way, and clearly working backwards is the way that we need to go as a company, because that's the solution. We need to be more like Amazon. So we're just going to copy all of these practices from Amazon, inject them into company X over here, and thus we're going to get the same results as Amazon. To me, that's the same copying behavior, or just looking at a general population without understanding business X, while they might be very close to Amazon, is not Amazon. And there's going to be very specific things that make either Amazon effective or company X effective at doing these things. So we need to be thinking with more precision versus more just generalization when we're looking at adapting practices or processes or any of that stuff. So that's what was kind of coming to mind when you were talking through it. What about you, Boobles?
I love that. What say you, Jeff?
Yeah. My mind, okay, well, a couple different things that I kind of went into. The first, I started thinking about it from a product standpoint. You know, I come into a lot of companies and they just say, well, the SME, the person who's worked in this industry for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, thinks we should build this feature or that feature. And so we build all the stuff, right? Because and then we look for the business results afterwards. It's kind of like medicine 2.0, where it's like, well, let's just, we should do these tests, and we should just, we should give this drug, and we should do this if this happens. And it's just like this general approach, like you were talking about, Jeff, where we see our most innovative companies, they take more of an experimental mindset, and they look at things like, what about this customer segment? Why didn't they convert? Why did they abandon the shopping cart right here? What could we do with that? And they run an experiment, and they test something there and there, and then they find out how to customize something to drive conversions or whatever there is the problem that they're trying to solve, right? And so it's much more of that personalized experimentation, and I think it's I don't know, maybe there's a little level of humility at the product level to say, I don't know everything, and we need to run some experiments to figure out what's going on. And I think that's very similar to the medicine 3.0, because like I don't know, personally, you could go to a doctor right now and you could say, hey, I think I might be deficient in some vitamin. I don't know which one it is. Could you do like a panel and like test that out and let me know what I'm missing? Like maybe there's some food I should be eating and incorporating into my diet. And they'll be like, go see a nutritionist maybe. And like they won't help you out. Like they won't run something for you to help you out with that. And there's probably a way to do it. That's just not something that they normally do,
Personalization. I think that's really key. I can't remember. I think I have post-holiday brain spongy. It's not there yet, recalling everything. But there's a lot around customization and really understanding human behavior, right? And we're very complex individuals. And so when we think about everything from how we sell, right? How we actually maintain a customer And then if we look internally, how we even function within the employee experience, right? It's all related to human behavior and highly complex. Now, part of that is we generalize a lot and we do a lot of planning in order to have that control as a business for a variety of reasons. And you can appreciate that. So in the class, when I was in the class with you, I referenced Shark Tank a lot. Well, I watch it like practically every night before I go to bed. And the reason why I do it's to remind me of what actually makes or breaks a business, what's a hobby versus a business, and really kind of understanding the kind of questions the investors are asking all of these individuals. So most of the companies that are out there are either have a board, they're public companies, or even a startup, they're trying to get funding, just like the people in Shark Tank, right? And they have to convince these investors of why am I going to invest in you? How am I going to make my money? There's a sense of some kind of certainty there. There's something that drives that ability to be able to get the funding, to be able to make your board happy, to your public stock, and why organizations act the way they act. And so let's go back to the topic of survival, right? Well, there's a direct correlation. How many people ever spend the time of really understanding what's driving the culture of that company and really understanding how are they even determining valuation? How I know I listened to a podcast from Melissa Perry had a guest on that said, every product person should really understand the finances of a company and how they run. But what about every employee? Especially people like what we do in agility, which is all about change and trying to shift, being more experimentative and stuff. And so all of this is really related to this concept of survival mode versus thrival. Thrival, is that even a word? Thrival mode, right? And agility. I'm starting to realize that as a culture, we talk about medicine, right? And we can probably bring up other analogies that are out there that are happening that have a direct correlation of how businesses are ran today. And there are some that are getting it, moving to 3.0, and some are still stuck in 2.0, just like a lot of doctors out there today. It's quite interesting is when we hit that, here's my hypothesis, and I'll stop with this, is that the day that we move more into 3.0 medicine as a general population is the day that you're going to see most organizations be that status quo. It's going to be the norm. I really truly believe what's coming out of business schools, how people are thinking, it is that we're still in the predominant 2.0. When we start seeing medicine shift, we're going to see corporate world, organization shift more. I truly believe that.
Sure. The more, people are thinking like that around you, you're influenced by that, for sure. I guess, what kind of got me thinking, from a finances standpoint, one of the things I'm talking to clients or in classes a lot with is like, hey, do you know the run rate of your team? Like, what does it cost per sprint for your team? And most people don't know. And I'm like, okay, take a blended salary, take some averages. What do you think it costs? And when you take some blended salaries, you can guess that most Scrum teams are somewhere between $40,000 and $75,000 every 2 weeks. Most teams are doing 2-week sprints. And then you look at what you're building and you're like, is it worth that much money? Did the company get a good deal on that? Did you because you're getting a deposit into your bank account every 2 weeks probably. But what did the company get for that 2 weeks? And if they just got some button colors, some aesthetic things that changed, or maybe some minor content changes, was that really worth that much money? Like I think you got to think about that long term. And it's, I think understanding that the finances and then understanding what makes a company profitable. Like even if you're think about like if you were going to sell your company, if your company was going to sell out to someone else and you had stock options, what would you do to get the highest price? Because whatever you're going to do there is probably just good business for the company. Like, let's just say you're like, well, we wouldn't want to do this because it would be a lot of extra risk, or, we don't have anybody, if Jeff leaves the organization, we don't have anybody to take on that chief product owner role. And so stockholders see that as a risk because you're not going to lose your innovation. And so they're willing to offer this price, not this price. Well, maybe we should build up that competency inside of our organization, right? Like, not that something could happen to Jeff, like he could leave, or he could just, win the lottery and he's done. And then, it's good business for us to mitigate that risk as an organization. So I think those are things to think about. So I think that finances are a great thing. Once people really realize the finances, they might hear a big number in passing here or there and think, oh, wow, we're doing amazing. And then they realize all the stuff that goes into that. And they're like, wow, there's not a lot of money left over. So what can we do to provide value?
Yeah.
So I think I really do think like that ownership mentality starts with understanding the finances, because people can handle it, right? Like they buy cars and houses and all kinds of investments and things like that, right? Like we're all adults and we do these things for our personal households. Why can't we understand it for our companies and have some visibility into that? I think that is a big key to unlocking ownership and accountability towards delivery.
Yeah.
We want to have fun. We want to be humane, right? But like, we also it's like the finances is kind of like breathing. Like you need to also breathe. Without money, you can't, you as a company, you can't breathe. And that's your number one thing. And then you do go into survival mode.
You still have to get donations. And so it's all related, regardless if you're profitable or non-profitable. I love where you're going with this finance piece of it, because most organizations, anyone that you really talk to, I mean, I ask these questions all the time now, being an employee. Do I get an answer? No, because some don't even know the answer in truth. I'm not going to lie. But I'm highly curious, because it's like, why are we doing things? What's motivating us? I mean, at the end of the day, I want to help the company be successful. But if I don't know what's making it successful, how am I going to contribute and make an impact? I mean, that's where my head is at. Now, what say you, the balance? I'm curious on both of your opinions. When it comes to, yes, we want finances, we want to know all of this stuff, but let's go back to that word risk. Innovation, right? I love Jeremy Gooch, right? You have to be comfortable with playing in the space of unknown. And so it's almost like a weird dating relationship marriage between finances and innovation, because one wants to really make sure things are certain and okay. And then the other one's like, wow, let's go, let's try this new, it doesn't, and it's scary. So as we're employees, all these wonderful ideas, all these things that we want to do, there's always these controls that are stopping us before it even gets started. I think it's a crying shame. We're built on a culture in a lot of organizations that don't allow that free thinking. It doesn't exist because we're so afraid when it comes to profit and losing money and costs. Now, that's where my head is more, is how do we allow an innovation group and a group that experiment, that you come to Vegas and you're going to lose X amount, and that's okay. We don't care what you do with it, as long as you're learning. What did you learn from it is probably my most important question from that, right? If you're just experimenting and having ideas and there's no learning from it of how you're going to move forward, I think that's where it falls short, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's where a lot of people lose. Like, so, what did you get from it?
Mm-hmm. If we keep the gambling thing going here, what my mind goes to is, I think a lot of organizations think of product development as deterministic. Like, if we do these things, these results will happen. There's a direct correlation, and there isn't. It's probabilistic. And so back to your metrics, Jeff, that you were talking about there. So number of experiments is good. That's one metric, but you got to balance that with what? Like, if we go to Vegas and we make, $1,005 bets, was that a good investment or bad investment? Maybe we were taking 1 out of 20 odds, and we won some, but we weren't taking very good odds. Like, we were only going to win 5% of those bets. So that wasn't very good. And the upside, wasn't there on that. Right. So maybe that wasn't a good investment or a good risk. So then I think you got to think about like, well, what is the, probability that this works? If there's some kind of confidence interval that, and what is the upside? Like, are we saying like this could be 1,000 to 1 odds? Is this a 10 to 1 odds type of thing? Like, and where are we willing to take? We'll have a lower probability of success, but there's big odds that we're going to hit a payday. And eventually we'll do enough of those. If we do enough of them, we'll hit one, but we know we're going to fail on some of them. And I think those are hard. The decision making is a really hard thing to quantify. And finding good decision makers is always the challenge. Some people can talk a good game, but like, how do you look at the data and then make the right judgments, knowing the industry and everything else? So maybe those are things to think about. I wouldn't just say like number of experiments is bad. Like maybe I think that is a metric to track. But then how do you measure good decisions? Like that would be my next question.
And that's so. I know this is a little bit particular to my situation, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But I'm with you on that. The other caveat that I run into is the other large problem is the delay to data, like what you're talking about is such a severe lagging indicator. It will take 3 to 5 years before I see what is the actual return on investment of this product that we just built, right? So if our time horizon is an experiment comes into our area, let's say we validate it, we think, yep, this is a good bet. We deflush the risk. It was a high risk, high reward item. We believe that we've moved the risk factor to maybe a medium or a low area. So now we've got a high value and a medium or low risk item that we think is going to project out. Fantastic. That goes in on somebody's roadmap, and it's another, I don't know, on the low side 6 months, on the high side 2 years before we even start building the damn thing, right? Yeah. And then it's 3-6 months, and then we have no control over the build process, right? Like if they do a really crappy job building the product and actually taking it to market, maybe they have a bad go-to-market strategy. Well, right, there's just so many plethora of things that are now completely outside of the realm of control for the area, the experimentation area, right? Like it could have been a great product idea, but a bad implementation of the idea, right? And all of that stuff is reality inside a product, right? There's so many facets to it. So not only is there a delay to actually getting the outcome metrics that we probably really want, but there's a lot of just things outside of the control. And this actually, as I'm talking about it, goes back to what we were talking about earlier for me when we were thinking about, the surviving versus thriving. I was going to tease you survive, but I can't remember what the word was that you... Anyway, there's a level of transparency that you need into the metrics. If I want to have buy-in, right, first I need visibility and transparency to what are these business metrics. And then I have to actually have the ability to influence those metrics, right? Because Jeff and I will know this intimately, but if our bonus at a company is based on the sales metrics, but I have zero influence or interaction with the sales team and no ability to influence those sales metrics in any way, shape, or form, and we don't hit the target and we don't get our bonus, that's incredibly deflating. Like, I'm really frustrated. In fact, now I'm mad at the sales team because they didn't do their job, right? And that's not creating a great environment for us to work in. So I guess my point being, kind of tying this all together, is having visibility to the metrics or the processes or the system, having visibility to the areas that we can influence and make changes is great. But if we don't actually have that ability, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead. Remember when I was saying that I was talking to my acupuncturist and she said release control? She was talking about her business as well, and she was sharing a story. And one of the things she said that really struck, like when you were talking about, this is kind of that generalizing, specializing, pocket, silos, yada, yada in organizations. Also, Jonathan Smart talks about that, where you really bring everyone together when it comes to delivering holistic value, right? She said, my business, I am just as successful when the day I realized that I needed to relinquish control, and she started working with a team. And she said, I exhaust less energy now by changing the way that I approach it. Now, how does this relate to what you were saying? It gets me thinking in organizations as we're not holistic. Is medicine 2.0, going back to that and surviving, is that traditional pockets of I am a cardiologist doctor, I am a pulmonary specialist, where in medicine 3.0 is now taking a very holistic approach, whole body, everyone working together, right? How many people don't know what other people are doing? When they go to this doctor, that doctor, that. I mean, the healthcare is very separated. I mean, that's how they got away with a lot of the opioid crisis, right? They were able to do all these things, and that's why some of the pharmaceutical dispensaries got in trouble. They made a lot of profit off of that siloed aspect. But there's a huge correlation to, again, survival and thriving. If we were to define what thriving looks like, there's something about the word holistic and transparency that surrounds what it means to actually thrive as a company. Most companies that I've gone into, and I would say the company I'm in right now, I'll just be honest, is siloed. And so the best thing that you can do when you're not in sync and working, when we talk about team can mean a lot of things, right? It's just, it can multiply in numbers, is that you're surviving the best way you can within those constraints and limitations. It's not a holistic approach at all. Thriving companies start breaking down those walls and they start looking across everything. So let's think about a couple of companies that probably we have in mind that have started to solve for that. What about Microsoft? Are they starting to be more holistic? I mean, if you really look at, I was looking at Simply Wall, and they have a lot of like the health of an organization, and their blop was green and it was all over the different facets. You know how they have that coach model care. They've been doing a lot of things. They've implemented a lot of different techniques and what might have you, a lot more learning culture. Are they an example of starting to move towards a medicine 3.0 type of company? And what other ones are out there today that are practicing that? Just kind of curious. What are your thoughts around that?
I guess, one that came to mind that I was thinking of, and I know it's like not probably the best time to bring this up, but like we've had Joe Justice on, and he has talked a lot about Tesla. And when we think about Tesla, they optimize for time. So a lot of companies optimize for cost and for profit, but those are really hard things. Yeah, you want that, but like they're saying everything's about time. The faster we can deliver something, the more chance we have to learn about what we should deliver next, and then we can solve the next problem. So everything's time. And so if you optimize for time, you're going to deliver incremental and iterative feedback all throughout. But one of the other things that they also have is a high level of transparency. And so going back to Jeff's original question that he had is like, well, what do you do when you don't have the transparency? It takes so long to get started. I'm thinking of like what Ken Schwaber said a long time ago, where he's like, without transparency, there's no hope for inspection and adaptation. If you have no inspection and adaptation, you're just blindly walking down a path. So the first step is transparency. And then second, I think optimize for time and just get to frequent delivery of trying different experiments out and then trying to figure out what to do next. And I think we spend way too much time, or a lot of companies spend way too much time on the pre-analysis of trying to figure out what to do, when they should try to do more of the post-analysis. We did this thing, here's the impacts, here's what little tweak we can make to affect this number or that number or this number. And so I think it's more after the fact, and the more you just do little things and you deliver frequently, the higher probability you have of something going well for you, or at least you hit something. Because I don't know that you can know the risk all the time that we were talking about before. I don't know that you can know the probability of something actually happening. So if you just optimize for time and just deliver frequently, are you giving yourself at least the best shot that you can with the risk you're willing to take? So if you're going back to the gambling model, you're willing to invest this much over this period of time to take these amount of experiments, and then you have to manage that budget. And the organization can still do the stuff that's transactional, that they like, that's been their cash cow, deliver that, right? And keep that going. But then they have an innovation over here where they're just trying to do that. I think innovation could go throughout, but like that could be one way. It's like, we're willing to set this money over here to invest it, and we're going to optimize for time and try to get to frequent delivery and see what works.
I love that. I love that, Jeff. You know, I always say that time is a precious asset. Once it's gone, you don't get it back.
Yep.
And so let's look at this holistically, where we're thinking about it as a business, but we also can use time when it comes to the employee experience. There's this huge thing that's out there and it's growing. I don't even think we fully understand the wave yet when it comes to what's happened here in the United States of the Great Resignation. I don't believe it's over. It's just simmering because of some of the things that are happening right now, but it hasn't left people's mind. They might be planning another exit if they're not happy right now. You just don't know, because I think that the can of worms has opened, right? The Pandora's box, it's been opened. And time is one of the things, I can say that about myself. That's why I got out of consulting. I wanted my time back. I didn't want to get up at 3:30 in the morning. I didn't want to get on a plane. I wanted to actually be in my own bed. I actually want to take my beach walks. So I'm actually one of those people that said, you know what? I want my time back. So time is a huge factor, both on an employee experience. And I think if we think about how we run our business, it's fourfold. I love that idea. I really do.
So I was thinking earlier about, again, the survival versus thriving with businesses. And you had kind of mentioned here just the environment that's going on. But I'm thinking specifically about the looming, well, we're either in a recession or we're heading into a recession, depending on who you speak with. And I'm curious, you had mentioned way earlier offline about seeing businesses go back into a survival mindset versus a thriving mindset. And as Jeff had mentioned earlier, like, there is a time and place for survival. Oh, there's a rustling in the bush. There's a lion. I should probably book it, right? Like, there's a time and a place for that. Is this an appropriate time and place for a business to potentially go back into survival mode when, okay, if there is a recession, if markets are churning, if there's a war in Ukraine, if X, Y, and Z is going on, like, do we take a prudent course of action and go into survival mode for a year or two? Or do we look at this as a business opportunity to grow and thrive, right? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
You know, I think it really depends on who you're going to ask in this question and how they're going to answer it. And so this is where I was going into energy with people, where they focus. There's going to be highly pragmatic people. They're going to answer you saying, hey, we're going to do what we know and approach that question in a very pragmatic way. Whereas others might be comfortable in the unknown of what is possible. To the other side of what you're saying is saying, how can we actually take this as an opportunity? Now, I'll give you one example on here. So when I was talking to the CEO of the GC Index that measures the organometric of the energy, one of the folks is a highly pragmatic strategist, highly results-driven individual. When the pandemic hit, his first natural reaction was, what are we going to do when it comes to, we need to think about how we're going to secure our sales, and he was thinking of what he only knows, right? What is in the past and what is happening in the present. Whereas others that have that other inclination of saying, well, wait a minute, no, I only see possibilities about what's happening right now. How can we actually create an opportunity around this? And so the other won a little bit. There doesn't mean we're not being pragmatic and practical, but they balanced it, is my point. And they were actually very successful during the pandemic, because what they did is they focused on what was actually happening during that time when it came to people. And their business actually grew. And they approached it that way, right? I'm not getting into the details around that. Now, this is where there's a huge opportunity. Yes, you want to be practical not being, you're spending all your money. But if you're going to go back to what you already know and already do, is that a disadvantage to you as a business? Maybe it's a time to rethink how well are your operations? How well are you really, approaching coming out of this, right? Are we going to do what we know and bear down on that? Or are we going to say, hey, we do need to think a little different? It's almost like the stock market when they say when the stock is down, you buy. Actually, I was going to call and see how I can do that with my mutual funds. I've been researching. I've never done that before. I've always been a lazy, kind of person. But I'm like, this is the time to actually buy when they're down. Mm-hmm. You don't buy when it's up, right? So we don't want to do what we always do right now. This is a huge opportunity to rethink. But the highly pragmatic folks, guess what's going to end up happening? The ones that are very pragmatic survivalists, they're going to do what they know. Unless there's others in the room with the energy for some game-changing ideas.
So I guess where my head is at, as you were talking through that, is though the pragmatic people are always going to be pragmatic, and the experimenters are always going to be experimenters, regardless of like the outside influences. So in the example you were using, you're saying, okay, well maybe now is a great time to take a look at our operations, and is there improvements that we could be making there? I would say like today is a great opportunity, tomorrow is, and so is the next day, like regardless of all the things going around. But I don't know if that's just the continuous improvement mindset. And honestly, this is where I struggle with like letting you said it a number of times now, just letting some things go, because when I come into an organization, what I see is dysfunction, like just all over the place, right? And maybe just because I'm a selfish jerk, and that's kind of like what I see is like, I could do that better, right? Like, oh, we should be doing this and this and this, with maybe not even really understanding everything. So shame on me. But my more general point that I'm trying to make is I'm not even certain like the outside influencers changes a person's mindset to that. So if somebody's already looking to improve, that's just how they approach problems. They're always looking to improve with things, versus somebody who is stuck in their way and okay, this is how we do it. We're going to just continue to do it this way.
Mm-hmm. We measure that energy now. They're called polishers.
Okay. Elaborate a little bit.
So there are 5 inclinations, right? So the case study was around 2015. They were actually trying to find out what makes a game changer. Through that research and study, they found that there were other 4 inclinations around there. So there's two obsessive energies to what we're talking about right now, which game changer is the energy around seeing what actually doesn't exist. So they take the present, the past, and the future. And so they are always about challenging the status quo. They're always about different, and their ability for change, when we talk about the change rate, you're going to see an average of a 1 to 2 year change rate versus the average of 5 years in individuals, right? If we think about that. The polisher is another obsessive energy, where you have one is all about the unique ideas. The other one is always about doing better and excellence. And so that's where a lot of that continuous improvement mantra, right? We can always do better. We know there's a better way of doing things. But their change rate might not be as short and frequent like a game changer, because they're that risk taking, that experiment is totally in their wheelhouse, right? You could probably talk to a lot of people. We might be those on this conversation this morning. The polisher one is a little bit more pragmatic about, but they're obsessive about always doing improvements, always knowing that there's a better way, right? So they're always improving, that continuous improvement mantra. That other side, and it's highly task oriented, where the other one's about ideation. There's a whole other side that's pragmatic, and that's kind of what I was referring to. A lot of the leaders is you have the ideation of pragmatic, where they're taking the past and the present. And so they're always asking a lot of whys. They're always wanting to understand things. And so they will take an idea and they'll want to rationalize it to make sure it makes sense, right? So that's in that idea space, but that's highly pragmatic in that approach, where the game changer is like, hey, we believe in flight, right? And then you have the results, which is the opposite of that polisher, which is an implementer. And they're highly task oriented as well, but they're always about getting things done. It's about the result, not how well the result is. So this goes back to, I see a lot of things that are dysfunctional. Well, if you probably took a temperature check of most organizations, I can tell you there's probably a C of that pragmatic side of strategists and implementers. They'll make sense of things, right? And do their strategies and planning, but it's always about the result. That other side, if we don't have leaders that are in that obsessive energy side, this is where what I just said about survive versus thrive and wanting to rethink about things, they're not going to want to put their energy in it when it comes to when we need to survive, right? It's about, let's do what we know has worked. I really don't want to try anything too different. It's not the time to do that. That's the best way for me to kind of say is, and we measure that energy now. And you can go to any organization and you can see what colors it lights up. And it's a telltale sign of how they're going to act when it comes to surviving and thriving.
So it seems to me that all of them are valuable, that all provide value and can help an organization, all the different energies you've talked about. What I think is
I forgot the playmaker one too.
Is that, what's that?
I forgot the playmaker one, which is all about the people side, just to kind of add that part.
What I do think, though, that happens a lot of times when people think bigger is better, and that's like the only way to get leverage as an organization. They get very specific into certain silos, and they don't see the whole system.
Yep.
And so then now I'm doing all this implementing over here to make this one little silo really, really efficient. But really, that's not the thing that's holding us back. It's something else. And we can't see that because all we know is this thing right here in front of us.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I've seen some organizations now where actually they've gone through a little bit of descaling and they have broader product definitions, more people that have really deep knowledge in different things, but they bring them together and they're now more true cross-functional teams. And they start to innovate and they actually get more into thriving, I think, is what some of them are starting to happen. But it's because the system changed. Not so much because of anything else. Like,
oh yeah,
they had to do the system because of financial constraints, and then it created an environment for this innovation to happen. So
that's like the fifth discipline, right? Is that rubber band effect? You know, a lot of times I'll go into organizations, and I just said that last inclination is the playmaker. Change is rough. And when you have a lot of pressure, there's always a lot of the finger pointing, right? In this and that and this and that. Well, the playmaker is always about collaboration and wanting everyone to work together. If you don't have that high energy in a team of people or existing, who's making sure everyone wants to work together?
Right.
And that's another energy I see missing a lot is the playmaker one. And it's weird because I've been working with this for a couple of years and I see it so clearly now, these energies. And again, it's a natural energy where you go to. It's kind of like why people do what they do. And you can tell when they're going into somebody that wants the results or somebody that wants different. And you can tell that's where their energies or those other inclinations. And no one is wanting to worry about how we collaborate well with each other. Their focuses are always somewhere else.
Sure thing.
And that fifth discipline, we have to create those systems. We have to think analytically. We have to think about metrics or what might have you. But we're a living organism in corporations. And this is why I got into life coaching, because I started to really understand that human factor. And so all of us here, right, we are into product and there's something about human behavior and it's highly complex. And there's a lot of unknowns to it. And if we don't take the time to really understand the human factor to all of these things that we're talking about, there's a reason why Microsoft, when Satya came into play and really focused on that coach model care aspect, why they were able to really do really well during the pandemic, because they started that program before the pandemic hit. And all their middle management was already focusing and starting to work in that manner. It tells a lot about when you go into companies, is the company culture really interested in that playmaking? I'm just going to call it that, right? Like where that energy is.
I think the playmaking, it's always a balance, right? It's a little bit of everything. I think that's just probably a good rule of thumb with almost anything.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not like, do we need all playmakers? Because I've seen organizations where they're too heavily focused on that, and they're not focused on the results, and they can't change. 'Cause it's always about,
That's consensus driven organizations. You know how that goes. Nothing ever gets decided.
Right. So I think, again, it's all about balance. So, and everything we're doing, I think a little bit of everything. You want these diverse teams with these different, energy levels. Like you like this one. I use DISC. Many people have used like the Myers-Briggs or other ones. I think all of them are beneficial. All the different like assessments that people can go out and take to learn like, where are we at? How do we like to work? And like, what do I disagree with or agree with on this? And then how do I know myself better? So then I can bring a better self to work, right? And work better with teams and have a language to talk about this with my teams about like the type of work that energizes me or doesn't, whatever it might be. So like, how do people learn more about like this assessment? How would they take that?
So one, it's not a psychometric like the others. It is an organometric that actually measures energy. It is known in the psychology world, so it's called an organometric. It's not a one or the other. It's more of where you are. Think of like in the middle of the story, the beginning of the story. This actually explains why. Whereas when you start to, and this is highly related to action. So if you're trying to make a business decision of where you want to get to action in relation to outcomes, that is what the GC index does. It's an organometric of where you want to put your energy to get to action in relation to achieving outcomes. The personality part, think about it, once you understand the why in relation to what you want to achieve, then that comes into play. I love like Strength Finder, some of the other ones, and I've actually used DISC in relation to the GC index and showed the difference between where some folks, have a certain DISC and where their energy to get to action is extremely different. And some are alike. But again, the point is it's not the same. And when you use it. And so the personality ones, that's where when we work a lot with teaming and coaching, once you understand where people want to get to action, they may or may not be strong in it. They may or may not have emotional intelligence around that energy. And that's where that development or team development might come into play, where that's where we can use emotional intelligence assessments, where your personality, we also know can change sometimes, right? Especially if you've gone through personal transformation, we change as people. So, and the GC index also changes. It's based on your values and belief systems. So, but we know, remember the pyramid, like when we learn about the identity and values and beliefs, it sits really up at the top, which has a direct correlation to all your behaviors and actions. So that's why I say you can start up there to really understand in relation to the identity and your values and beliefs. And then once you understand the person's behaviors, someone can be a game changer dominant. The person that I had on my show, I'll just leave with that. We had the exact same GC index results, but we are extremely different in our personality. Completely different. If you ever watched our shows, she's not like me at all, right? We had the exact same energy of how we get to action. That was what was complementary, I think, between her and I. She got me. my crazy ideas, me always wanting to do different things. And I found a sense of camaraderie with her. Game changers always will find sense of camaraderie with each other. You don't even realize it. It's funny. I did a whole video stint on that. So the GC index is an organometric. It measures impact of how people want to put their energy, their preferred energy, and it's scalable. So you can do individual. I really love team, and you can actually do an entire business unit, or you can do an organization. You also, if you work with OKRs, or if you work with goals, or anything that's outcome, you can align it to outcomes. So you can think about creating teams and people aligning to outcomes and increase your probability, because that's where they're going to get to action. They're not going to run out of steam. So think of Marcus Buckingham when he talks about momentum, right? He does the Strengths Finder. He's the creator of that. And I love physics. I was a science major, right? So if you think about, you could be really good at something, but it's not where you want to put your energy. How many of us have ever had a job? We have talent in something, but it's not your thing. You'll just do it. We're never going to get the best out of that person. Or if we have a collective team of people, they are going to lose steam out of continuous improvement if that's not where the energy is. Their energy is more at implementing and getting results. And you wonder why you go into a team, Agilists listening out there, and probably the two of you, why you can't get them to focus on continuous improvement. They just won't go there.
So what's the solution for that? If you had a team, they won't focus on that.
Balance.
Are they just missing the balance? They need somebody with
You hit it on the nail,
index.
buddy.
Okay.
Balance. It's game-changing teams is all about having all of those 5 elements and really understanding what you're trying to achieve. So we're all about being outcome focused, right? All of us. So if we actually understood the outcome that we want to achieve, we can ensure that we're building the right teams to achieve that, especially for rounding. So let's talk about surviving versus thriving, since this was the topic for today. If we really needed some new ways of thinking how we're going to survive in 2023, heck yeah, you're going to want some people that are going to be thinking different, not the same, right, in that mix. Because what's going to end up happening, you're going to do business as usual, and you might get the same results, which might not be what you're wanting at the end of 2023.
When you were talking earlier about the Shark Tank, you watching it or listening to it, I've never actually seen it. So, but you had made the comment that you find it interesting, the questions that they're asking. I'm curious how much of that is real versus they make that shit up for TV. And so and again, I have no idea. But when I think about reality TV, like, it's people who have been in reality TV will tell you, like, they just make up stuff to happen to make it entertaining to watch when you're watching a reality TV. Like, that's not reality. They just want you to think it's reality, and it wants to be engaging. So I have never talked with anybody in the investor side, like, who actually goes out and looks at businesses like this. I would just be kind of curious, like, how much of Shark Tank is reality versus how much is entertainment?
Oh, for sure. I mean, if you watch HGTV, I mean, they talk about love it or list it and how things are shaped. But however, Mark Cuban or any of those folks that are on there, the questions they're asking, it's going to be a little hard for them to make that up, because that's how their brains think, and they're asking those questions. Now, just like any reality TV, they do their cuts and edits, and then they make a pretty perfect show. So we don't know all the things that really happened when that one individual or the group of people that are going in there to try to get an investment, right? Or investors. But those questions are actually, they make sense and they're logical. I'll say it that way. They're common sense things, where when they ask about, what are your sales, right? What's your profit that you have? And they talk about valuation, which that whole thing confuses me about valuation, especially when I was listening to that podcast Melissa Perry, where every company does valuations differently, right? And they're asking for 100,000 at 5%, and it has a relation to the valuation, blah 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 blah. So all of that stuff, I think, for the average Joe, I'm going to call myself that person. That's good learning. Because there are things that they're asking in there that you're going, that's a logical question that any business, how they're making sales, what is their profit at the end of the day, what are they taking home, right? And when they start to talk about, is this a hobby or is this a business, right? That's a very natural question when in entrepreneurship. And one thing I love is when they say, what problem are you solving? I don't really think that's a problem out there that really has a need, which might not be a good idea. So if you think about innovation and experiment in companies when they're trying to do things, we always ask in product, we try to teach them, hey, what problem are you trying to solve? Well, then you get books like Reframe the Problem and, all of those out there. Is that really the problem they should be focusing on? Is it really a need? Right? It could be a problem, but is it a need out there in the market? So I find Shark Tank for the average person, it should go, It should make you think and go, this makes sense. How is our company running? I should be kind of curious. Like anybody go ahead.
Do you find the questions on there, and again, like 100% ignorance, I've never seen it before. Do you find the questions, though, are outside of what you would typically isn't the right word, but what you would expect to find in a business case scenario? Like if you were asked to write a business case, the questions that the people on Shark Tank are asking, are they outside of that? Or would you be like, yeah, that would be in a typical business case that I would be writing up?
I would say
I think that they're mostly...
Yeah, go ahead.
They're mostly in the side of a business case, but they're also like, I think one of the cool things about them from a product standpoint is they're like, somebody might come up with a really high, like proposed evaluation that they're proposing for what they want for funding. And there's some risk, some assumptions that they're making, and they'll call that out right away. Like they'll get some questions and be like, wait, you haven't validated that you can sell in this market, but you think you can, like that's until you do that, like I don't even want to talk to you. Like they're like, you may think you have a good idea, it sounds great on paper, but you have validated nothing from like, will people buy this? And so like they'll wholly like downplay that, or they'll be like, oh, all you need is like a marketing channel, and like you've already proved it here and here, but you it's not at scale. I've got a marketing channel, this is like a day of effort for me, and I can like probably double your sales. And they're all about those types of things. So like,
or you spend all this money on marketing, like who does that?
Right. So they're pretty good at like saying, well, if we were to partner, like I can leverage really quickly something that's going to really help you. But in this case, like you haven't validated anything, so I don't even know why I'd give you money. So I do think like it is pretty good from that standpoint. It makes you stop and think about your product, because anytime you have a product, you're like a parent, right? Like my children can do no wrong. Like everything looks good, you're super excited about it.
It's a show, though. At the end of the day,
it's a show, and they are adding drama to it. And I've even heard rumors that that's not water they drink; it's like vodka or something. So like,
but what I do though, some of the businesses, I go online and I Google and see if they're out there. What are they doing? What might have you? They again, it's a show. But for the average person, most of us don't even understand that stuff. And I actually learned some of the stuff by watching the show. And that is what I love about it, is just basic fundamental things that is happening within there. Why are we not learning and teaching that in every employee in a company? Most of us will go to work, collect a paycheck, and we have no idea how the business runs, all of the types of questions that they're asking, because we're so detached from it. And I think for me, and this is just my biased personal opinion, I don't think that helps a company, that if I just go in, oh, you have great benefits, you have what I need, I'm just doing my job, and here's my paycheck. Really? I think you sell yourself short as a company, that when you're a startup and you're starting, I bet you the probability that everyone in the business has an understanding of what's happening, but the larger you get, that starts to go down in numbers. And is there a direct correlation of how that impacts the company in relation to what our topic was, surviving versus thriving? I think it's all related.
Yep. I think companies often go towards efficiency. They separate people from the whys, from the values, why they get separated from the, what actually makes us money, how we solve problems in the world, and they just focus on their competency. And then, we do that competency really well, but maybe that influences the numbers, maybe it doesn't. And a lot of times I don't think it really helps with the end result because it's just the one thing. So
that's why I'm
maybe
passionate.
a step back.
Yeah. I'm passionate about financial intelligence. I mean, I wasn't raised that way. I mean, it's probably one of the things why I'm really glad that they're trying to incorporate that more, because we take that into our work, our unawareness of financial intelligence. And so all those questions that probably the two of you, when you go into a company, are asking probably smart questions and going, why doesn't this not make sense? How many people do that?
Probably not enough. That's, why it stands out, People are like, whoa, that's different. Why do we need to know all that? And those are the things I struggle with when I go into organizations, be like, well, I don't need to know what the run rate of our team is. I don't need to know like how we're doing as a company. I'm like, do you understand? Like, if your company doesn't make money, like
you don't have a job,
don't have a job.
Why they might be having layoffs and why they're deciding to do X, Y, and Z. Like, do even people understand even some of the reasons why companies have layoffs as some of their strategies, right? It's not just one, right? And sometimes they're doing it because that's the only way to get ready for something, but they won't tell you what because they can't tell you. Especially if they're a public company and they need to look good on the books. If you don't look like you're a profitable company, but you have a lot of revenue, you might not be someone that people want to invest in.
Yep.
So how do you make yourself more profitable? Right? Operations. Guess what happens in companies? Instead of being more effectively of how you operate, what's the first thing that they do?
You cut
Whack
costs.
the people.
You outsource. Yep.
So the more we understand these things, again, survival versus thriving, how about if we understood how a company is surviving and we have these ideas or ways to make a company better, how can we, one little person, right? If we all, I'm just me and I have no way to influence, we all believe that we're all leaders, is that one thing could change us to be more thriving.
Yep. I agree. So I think that's a call out. Like if you think your company is in either mode, like you should be offering suggestions. You should be trying to improve. You should be trying to learn more. The more you know, the more you don't even know how it's going to help you, but the more you understand the financial situation, you understand how the organization works and inside
Raises,
of its markets,
bonuses,
all that stuff. You're going to be able to influence everything, and you're going to be able to come up with the creative, innovative ideas that maybe somebody else didn't think of. Like I don't think it has to come from one or two people at the top, like in the C-suite. It should come from everybody. But that takes everybody taking ownership, and they can't take ownership if they don't have the information. And if they don't have the information, once they have the information, they need to be able to make some decisions off of that information. So I think those are things to be thinking about inside of your organizations. How do you make the information more transparent? How do you give more people decision-making power? And then how do you have more shared ownership? And there's risk with that, but like you want more shared risk and rewards, right? So I think those are things to be thinking about inside of your organization.
I wonder how many people, when you talk to them and have conversations, that don't see the correlation of your raises, your bonuses, about certain things that happen. So some companies had some layoffs recently to prepare for 2023. Now, one thing that might not be clear because they don't really tell us, right? Most of the time, some companies are very transparent in their decisions of why they do what they do, but it could be so they can give raises and bonuses to people because they care about retention. We don't know. Or it could be they're lining up because they want to spend money on some kind of venture. Maybe they want to buy a company or this or that. We have no idea. With all the layoffs that were actually happening at your company, how many people actually understand the reason behind it, truly?
Yeah, probably not many.
No. But I would want to know because it has a direct correlation for me as an employee, for me to thrive.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to the transparency that we were talking about earlier. Like people, if they're more informed, at least you, even if it's a decision you don't agree with, I would suspect understanding the thought process and the whys behind it makes it more, what's the word I'm looking for? Just able to be dealt with.
Isn't that what you do in parenting? You know,
Say again?
Yeah.
what you do in parenting. You know, I find it quite funny.
Right.
Now, I don't have any children, but I was a school teacher, so I dealt with the results of the lack of parenting. I'm just going to put it that way. I dealt with teenagers, so it was pretty evident by those years, is that we, for some reason, don't see leadership, right? People leaders is what I'm referring to, as a similarity to parenting. What you just said is just like what we would want how we raise children. So why are we doing it differently in a company? And you'll be like, well, they're not children. Well, if we really think about the logics as someone is creating the rules of the game and they have the ability to create the environment like we talked about, right? The fifth discipline. Yeah, it is like parenting.
Yeah, if you want people to make decisions like you would make a decision, then you have to teach them how you make those decisions, and you have to give them opportunities to make those decisions. And I think it's very much like parenting. Like you give your kids smaller responsibilities, you have them show that they can handle things, and then you give them more and more and more, and make them more resilient to different situations they're going to run into. It's no different in a company.
Am I saying that there's just bad parenting? Okay, I hate to be so facetious and I say this is, if it's bad parenting in the company, is that a direct correlation in parenting on a personal world? Like, I have to wonder, me being, when I was in education, that was one of the reasons why I left. The fact that I was going to have to live in my parents' guest bedroom forever because I couldn't afford was another one. But the other one was the lack of parent participation and that I was getting the brunt of their mess. I'm not going to lie. Like, it was really hard that I was like, why am I the one helping? Like, I felt like I was on an island. Like, where's the parents? I don't know. Maybe I'm highly biased about this opinion, but I see the same thing happening in companies of what I saw in my classrooms as a teacher. Period.
Yeah, I think that just like, I don't know, like being parents and then being leaders in organizations, some key things. What works well? Well, you need to have some type of goal. What are we trying to accomplish here? Because if you don't have some goal, we're just meandering, right? We're just going wherever we're gonna go. So you have to have some goals, and you have to like be working towards those, and then have rapid feedback loops to say, are we hitting that or are we not hitting that? There's got to be a human element to it. So like you meet the people where they are and then help them and whatever they need. People want to be known. They want to have those relationships, right? Like at work or with your parents, with your kids, right? They want relationships. So I think those are some key elements. And then they have to know like if they're hitting the mark or not hitting the mark, and giving the conflict to saying and dealing with it and being like, you didn't hit the mark here. This isn't how we do it here. Like this is our family values, or this is our company values, and this is how we live them. This didn't hit the mark. That conversation rarely happens. And if it did happen more, I think people would understand it, and it would get so far down the line where we have to do layoffs and firing and different things like that. I think
and
we're very, very sensitive to those things.
And learning and failing and the humility that, parenting, just like being a people leader, is not easy. You're going to mess up. You only know what you know, right? And you're learning and adapting. I loved, I watched recently, I'll just kind of circle it back to our Medicine 2.0, 3.0 conversation with Peter Attia. He, is it MedTed conference? I think that's what it's called. It was in 2014, I think, if I got the year right. He was talking about his shift in his mindset, and telling a story about somebody that he was judging with diabetes, and he had to cut the toe off, right? Like, and he basically was apologizing because where he was and where he is today. And he said, I'm learning every single day. This is how he ended the talk. I'm learning every single day because I only know what I know. Mm-hmm. That's pretty humble. And I think that is something, how many, we talk about leadership and I talk about the people part. It is huge because thriving versus surviving has a direct correlation to that culture, for sure.
Yep. I agree. I think that's something leaders can model, right? Like that, the fixed mindset versus a mindset of growth, a growth mindset. So you have to model that and you have to demonstrate that. Veronica, at this time we've covered a lot of topics, and I think we could go on and talk about a million things yet.
I know.
But we probably should shut it down and get back to our other stuff that other commitments that we have. So at this time, is there anything you want to promote to our listeners?
Be curious. What we talk about today could change tomorrow. Just stay open and curious. But I would say, don't forget yourself in this mix. I think that's really important is we talk about companies, we talk about the survive and thriving, but it always starts with you as an individual. How are you thriving? Right? Because a company can't thrive if you as an individual is not thriving. So my thing is stay open, be curious, and start with yourself when it comes to thriving.
Thank you for listening to the Agile Wire. We are consistently inspecting and adapting ourselves. We would appreciate feedback at feedback@theagilewire.com or on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play Store. See you next time.